the documents scattered across the marble floor like accusations. Amara's hands trembled as she stared at the date. March 15th, 2022. 3 years ago. The dissolution of marriage had been finalized 3 years ago, and she'd known nothing about it. Mrs. Kane. The clerk's voice seemed to come from underwater. Are you all right? Amara couldn't breathe. The registry office suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. She'd come here for a simple property document, something Victor had asked her to retrieve. A routine errand. Instead, she'd stumbled into the truth that shattered everything she thought she knew. There must be a mistake, she whispered, but even as the words left her lips, she knew. Deep down, in that place where she'd been burying suspicions for months, she knew there was no mistake. The clerk's expression softened with pity. I'm sorry, but the records are clear. The marriage was legally dissolved. Both parties signed. There was a hearing. I never attended any hearing. Amara's voice cracked. I never signed anything. The clerk pulled up more files on her computer, and Amara saw it all laid out in bureaucratic precision. Victor's signature, a lawyer's name she'd never heard. Court dates she'd never been informed of. Her entire marriage, erased with paperwork while she'd been living in their villa, believing she was his wife, believing his promises, believing in a life that had been legally dead for 3 years. Amara gathered the documents with shaking hands, shoving them into her bag. She needed to leave, needed air, needed to think. The Singapore heat hit her like a wall as she stepped outside, but she barely felt it. Her mind was racing backward, searching for clues she'd missed. The taxi ride back to the estate passed in a blur. She stared out the window at the gleaming cityscape, at the life happening beyond her gilded prison. When had she last been out alone? Really alone, without Victor's driver, without his security, without his invisible leash pulling her back? The estate gates opened automatically as the taxi approached. Of course they did. Victor always knew when she was coming home. The cameras, the tracking systems, the staff who reported her every movement, she'd accepted it all as normal. As protection, as love. Her villa sat pristine and perfect in the manicured gardens, all glass and marble and expensive emptiness. 5 years she'd lived here. 5 years since she'd given up everything for Victor Kane. Amara dropped her bag on the entry table and walked through rooms that suddenly felt like stage sets. The living room where she'd never been allowed to have friends visit. The kitchen where staff prepared meals she never chose. The bedroom where Victor came and went as he pleased, but she needed permission to leave. Her studio was the only space that felt remotely hers. She stood in the doorway, looking at the abandoned sketches scattered across her desk. Fashion design had been her dream once. She'd been accepted to Parsons in Paris, a full scholarship, her ticket to everything she'd worked for. Then she'd met Victor at a gallery opening. Powerful, magnetic, overwhelming. He'd swept into her life like a hurricane, and she'd been caught in his orbit. Within 3 months, he'd proposed. Within 6, she'd turned down Parsons to stay with him. Why would you leave? He'd said, his hands framing her face with such tenderness. I'll give you everything you need. We'll build your career here together. I'll be your patron, your muse, your everything. She believed him. God, she'd been so young, so stupidly in love. Amara picked up a pencil and tried to sketch, but her right hand cramped immediately. The injury from 2 years ago had never properly healed. She'd been in a car accident. At least, that's what Victor had told her. She couldn't remember it clearly. Just waking up in the hospital with her hand bandaged and Victor sitting beside her bed, his face etched with concern. I almost lost you, he'd whispered. I can't let anything happen to you. You're too precious. After that, the security had increased. More cameras, more restrictions. All for her safety, Victor said. all because he loved her too much to risk losing her. She switched the pencil to her left hand, the strokes awkward and unpracticed. The design taking shape was all wrong, but she kept drawing anyway. It was something to do with her hands while her mind spun out of control. The sound of Victor's car in the driveway made her stomach clench. She quickly hid the documents from the registry office in her desk drawer and forced herself to breathe normally. She'd gotten good at hiding her feelings over the years. Victor didn't like it when she was upset. It made him worry. It made him tighten his grip. Amara. His voice carried through the villa, warm and intimate. Darling, where are you? She met him in the living room, and as always, her traitorous heart still jumped at the sight of him. Victor Kane was objectively beautiful, tall, impeccably dressed, with those sharp features and dark eyes that had first captivated her. But now, knowing what she knew, she saw something else in those eyes. Something predatory. There you are. He crossed to her, pulling her into an embrace that felt more like a claim of ownership. How was your errand? Did you get the documents? Yes, she managed. All sorted. He pulled back to study her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. You look pale. Are you feeling all right? Just tired, she said. Maybe a headache coming on. His expression shifted to concern, but there was something calculated about it now that she was looking properly. You push yourself too hard. You need to rest more. Let me take care of you. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek box. Actually, I have something for you. I've been worried about your health lately. Amara opened the box to find a platinum bracelet, elegant and modern, with a small digital screen embedded in the design. It looked expensive. It looked like a gift. It's a health monitor, Victor explained, taking it from the box. It tracks your heart rate, stress levels, sleep patterns. I know you won't always tell me when something's wrong, so this way I can keep an eye on you even when we're apart. He fastened it around her wrist before she could protest. The clasp closed with a soft click, and Amara felt the weight of it like a shackle. It's beautiful, she heard herself say. Thank you. Anything for you, love. He kissed her forehead. I have some calls to make. Why don't you rest? I'll have dinner sent over later. After he left, Amara stared at the bracelet glinting on her wrist. She tried to remove it, but the clasp wouldn't budge. It required a special tool, apparently. Of course it did. She returned to her studio and pulled the registry documents from her drawer, spreading them across her desk. The marriage dissolution, the signatures, the dates. She photographed everything with her phone, the one Victor had given her, monitored by Victor, but it was all she had. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the bracelet's weight on her wrist, feeling the cameras watching from the corners of the room. How had she lived like this for so long without seeing it? At 2 a.m, she got up and went to Victor's study. He kept a laptop there, and she knew the password. He thought she didn't, but she'd watched him type it once in a reflection. Her birthday, backwards. Even his secrets were possessive. She opened the laptop with trembling fingers and began to search. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for. Marriage certificate. Victor Kane and Elena Cross. Date. For years ago. Elena Cross. Amara typed the name into a search engine and found society pages, charity galas, corporate events. Elena Cross Kane, wife of billionaire CEO Victor Kane. Elena was beautiful, poised, public. Everything Amara wasn't allowed to be. She found more photos. Victor and Elena at a hospital benefit. Victor and Elena cutting a ribbon at a new Kane Industries facility. Victor and Elena at their wedding, her in a designer gown, him looking at her the way he'd once looked at Amara. The most recent photo was from 2 months ago. Elena was pregnant, her hand resting on a visible bump, Victor's arm around her waist. Amara's vision blurred. She clicked through more files, finding property records. The adjacent estate, The villa she could see through the trees from her window belonged to Elena Kane. They'd been living side by side all this time. Victor had been moving between two homes, two lives, two women, and she'd known nothing. She found financial records next. Monthly payments to an account in her name, but one she'd never accessed. Hush money, she realized. Amara kept digging through the files, her horror mounting with each discovery. There were surveillance reports, detailed logs of her daily activities, her movements within the villa, even transcripts of phone calls she'd made to her mother years ago before those calls had mysteriously stopped. She remembered Victor telling her that her mother was busy, that she'd call back, that maybe the time difference made things difficult. Now she wondered if her mother had ever received her messages at all. She found emails between Victor and his head of security discussing containment protocols and monitoring the asset. The asset. That's what she was to them. Not a person, not even a mistress, just something to be managed and controlled. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely navigate the mouse. She needed to copy these files, needed evidence, but Victor's security systems were sophisticated. Any file transfers would be logged. She pulled out her phone instead and began photographing the screen, trying to capture as much as possible before her nerve failed completely. A sound from the hallway froze her in place. Footsteps. But Victor wasn't supposed to be home. He'd said he was staying at his downtown apartment tonight. The downtown apartment that, she now realized, was probably Elena's home. Amara quickly closed all the windows and shut down the laptop, her heart hammering. She slipped into the hallway, moving silently toward her bedroom. The footsteps had stopped. Maybe she'd imagined them. Maybe paranoia was finally taking over. She didn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed threatening, every creak of the house ominous. The bracelet on her wrist felt like it was burning into her skin. At dawn, she examined it more carefully, using a jewelry tool from her design supplies to pry open the decorative panel on the side. Inside was a maze of tiny electronics, more sophisticated than any health monitor needed. A GPS chip, what looked like a microphone, sensors that went far beyond simple heart rate monitoring. This wasn't about her health. This was about total surveillance. Amara carefully closed the panel, her mind racing. She couldn't take the bracelet off without Victor knowing. She couldn't leave the estate without being tracked. She couldn't even have a private thought in her own home. She was trapped in the most complete way possible, trapped by technology, by law, by a man who'd convinced her his obsession was love. But now she knew, and knowing changed everything. Over the next few days, Amara played the role Victor expected. She was quiet, compliant, grateful. She wore the bracelet without complaint. She smiled when he visited. She let him believe everything was normal. But in stolen moments, she planned. She used the library computer during a supervised shopping trip to email her old professor at Parsons, explaining her situation in careful terms. She opened a bank account under her birth name, Amara Okoye, using her old passport that Victor didn't know she'd kept. She began practicing designs with her left hand, sketching in notebooks she hid beneath her mattress. And at night, when Victor wasn't there, she explored the estate grounds. She'd been confined to this property for so long that she'd stopped questioning its boundaries. Now she mapped every exit, every security camera blind spot, every potential escape route. That's how she found herself at the edge of the property one evening, looking through the trees at the neighboring villa. Elena's villa. Lights blazed from every window. There was a dinner party happening. She could see people moving inside, hear the faint sound of laughter and music. Amara moved closer, staying in the shadows. Through the enormous windows, she could see Victor. He was holding a wine glass, laughing at something a man in a tuxedo was saying. And beside him, radiant in a silver gown, was Elena. Her pregnancy was more visible now. Victor's hand rested protectively on her back. Amara watched him be everything with Elena that he'd never been with her. Public, proud, present. He introduced Elena to guests with obvious affection. He touched her casually, comfortably, the way you touch someone whose place in your life is secure and acknowledged. This was his real life. Elena was his real wife. This villa, these parties, this public existence, this was what he'd chosen. And Amara was what he kept in shadows. His secret, his possession, his crime. She must have made some sound, some betrayal of her presence, because suddenly Victor's head turned toward the window. His eyes scanned the darkness, and Amara ducked behind a tree, her heart pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. She waited, frozen, for long minutes before daring to move. When she finally crept back to her own villa, she found Victor waiting in her living room. "Where were you?" His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Just walking the garden," she said. "I couldn't sleep." He stood and crossed to her, his eyes searching her face. "The bracelet showed your heart rate was elevated. You're stressed about something. What's wrong, darling?" The endearment felt like poison. "Nothing. I just needed fresh air. You were near the property boundary." It wasn't a question. Of course he knew exactly where she'd been. "That area isn't safe at night. I don't want you wandering that far from the house." "I didn't realize there were rules about where I could walk in the garden," she said, and immediately regretted it. She saw his expression shift, saw the flash of something cold in his eyes. "Rules?" He moved closer, crowding her space. "Is that what you think this is?" "I'm trying to protect you, Amara. The world is dangerous. There are people who would hurt you to get to me. Elena's been making threats. She's unstable, jealous. I need to know where you are to keep you safe." Elena. He was actually using Elena as an excuse, as if his pregnant wife was the threat here. "I'm sorry," Amara forced herself to say. "You're right. I wasn't thinking." His expression softened, and he pulled her into an embrace. "I know you feel confined sometimes. I understand, but things are going to change soon. I'm finally ready to make this official." Amara stiffened in his arms. "What do you mean?" He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I'm divorcing Elena. The lawyers are drawing up papers now. In 6 months, we'll have a proper wedding. Public, official, everything you deserve. The world will finally know that you're mine. The world will know you're mine. Not that she was his partner. Not that she was his equal. That she was his possession, finally claimed in public." 6 months? She echoed. "I know it seems like a long time, but these things take time to do properly. Elena will fight it, of course, but she'll lose. I always get what I want." He kissed her forehead. "And I want you. Forever. Forever." The word that should have sounded like a promise felt like a life sentence. After he left that night, Amara sat in her studio and stared at her designs. 6 months. He was giving her a timeline, probably thinking it would make her compliant, would give her something to look forward to. Instead, he'd given her a deadline. She picked up her pencil with her left hand and began to draw. Not the pretty, commercial design she used to create. Something darker. Something that captured what she was feeling. Cages made of precious metals. Chains disguised as jewelry. Beauty that imprisoned. She called the collection the Gilded Cage in her mind, and for the first time in years, she felt something like purpose flowing through her. The next morning, Amara received permission for a shopping trip. Victor had been pleased with her apology the night before, pleased with how she'd accepted his marriage proposal. He was in a generous mood. So when she asked if she could visit the designer district to look at fabrics, he'd agreed, assigning her his usual driver and a security guard. She played her role perfectly. She browsed fabric stores, exclaimed over silks and brocades, made small talk with shop owners. The driver and guard relaxed, bored by the mundane errands. And when they stopped at a cafe for lunch, Amara excused herself to use the restroom. Instead, she slipped out the back exit. The crowded market district swallowed her immediately. She'd chosen this location carefully, a maze of narrow streets and covered stalls where security cameras were sparse and crowds were thick. She moved quickly, her heart racing, constantly glancing over her shoulder. Freedom. After 5 years, she was actually alone, unwatched, unrestricted. The sensation was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She had maybe 15 minutes before the bracelet's GPS would alert Victor's security. She had to move fast. She found an electronics shop tucked between a spice vendor and a tailor. The owner looked up as she entered, and something in her expression must have alarmed him because his smile faded. "I need help," she said quietly. "This bracelet. I need to know exactly what it does, and if there's any way to disable the tracking temporarily without triggering an alert." He examined the bracelet, his expression growing darker. "This is serious surveillance equipment. Military grade. Who put this on you? Please, can you help me or not?" He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I can create a signal loop. It'll replay your current location for about 30 minutes. After that, the system will recognize the pattern and alert whoever's monitoring." "Is 30 minutes enough?" "It has to be." He worked quickly, using tools she didn't understand to interface with the bracelet. "There," he said finally. "You're in a loop. But miss, whoever's tracking you, they're going to know something's wrong soon. Be careful." Amara paid him with cash she'd been secretly saving and hurried back into the market. She had 30 minutes of freedom. 30 minutes, too. 3 men stepped in her path. They were too well-dressed for this neighborhood, too purposeful in their movements. The lead man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Kane, Mr. Kane has been worried about you." "I'm fine," she said, trying to step around them. "I just needed some air." The man's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "I think you should come with us." Amara jerked away, and suddenly all 3 were surrounding her. One grabbed her bag. Another shoved her toward the alley. She opened her mouth to scream. And then Victor was there. He appeared like an avenging angel, his security team materializing from nowhere. There was a brief, violent scuffle. The 3 men fled, disappearing into the crowd. Victor's arms wrapped around Amara as she shook. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." But as Victor held her, Amara saw something that made her blood freeze. The lead attacker, the one who'd grabbed her arm, glanced back at Victor before vanishing into the crowd. Just for a second, and in that glance she saw recognition. Acknowledgement. Almost like a signal passing between them. It had been staged. All of it. Victor carried her to the waiting car, his security team forming a protective circle around them. He was saying something about Elena, about hired thugs, about how dangerous it was for Amara to be out alone. But Amara wasn't listening. She was replaying those few seconds in her mind, that knowing look, the too perfect timing of Victor's arrival. He'd orchestrated the whole thing, created a threat so he could be her savior. So she'd feel grateful, dependent, afraid to leave his protection. Back at the villa, Victor was tender and attentive. He had the doctor come to check her over, insisted she rest, brought her tea himself. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, his thumbs stroking across her knuckles. "I could have lost you today," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If I hadn't been nearby, if my security hadn't been tracking you." "How did you know where I was?" Amara interrupted. "The cafe is 10 blocks from where you found me." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "The bracelet, of course. When your heart rate spiked, I knew something was wrong. I came as fast as I could." She wanted to call him a liar. Wanted to tell him she knew the attack was fake, that she'd seen the truth in that moment. But fear kept her silent. If Victor knew she was questioning him, knew she'd discovered his manipulation, What would he do? Thank you, she said instead, for saving me. He smiled, relieved. Always. I'll always save you, Amara. That's what love is. After he left, Amara lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The bracelet felt heavier than ever. She tried to escape, even just for half an hour, and Victor had turned it into another chain binding her to him. Another proof that she couldn't survive without him. But she'd learned something valuable. Victor's control wasn't perfect. There were cracks in his surveillance, gaps in his monitoring. The electronic shop owner had created a signal loop, even if only for 30 minutes. That meant the technology could be fooled. And if the technology could be fooled, Victor could be beaten. She just had to be smarter about it. Over the following weeks, Amara became a ghost in her own life. She was physically present, playing her role, but mentally she was planning, calculating, preparing. She smiled at Victor's visits. She accepted his gifts. She let him believe his staged rescue had worked, that she was more dependent on him than ever. In reality, she was learning the patterns of his life. When he visited Elena, when he stayed at his downtown office, when his security was most relaxed, she mapped it all in her mind, creating a schedule of his movements. She also discovered that the villa's library had a computer that wasn't part of Victor's main network. It was older, probably forgotten, tucked in a corner behind outdated reference books. She used it carefully, accessing it only when she knew Victor was with Elena, clearing the browser history obsessively. Through that computer, she reconnected with her old professor at Parsons. Professor Catherine Morris had been her mentor, the one who'd fought to get Amara that scholarship to Paris. Now, reading Amara's carefully worded emails, she understood what was happening. "I can help," Professor Morris wrote back. "I have contacts in Paris who specialize in helping women in your situation. But you need documentation. Proof of the illegal imprisonment, the surveillance, the manipulation. Can you get that?" Amara could. She'd been photographing everything. Victor's files, the surveillance logs, the financial records showing she'd been declared legally divorced while being held as a mistress. She'd even managed to document the fake attack, finding security camera footage from a nearby shop that showed Victor's team in position before the attackers appeared. She sent it all to Professor Morris through encrypted email, using a service the electronic shop owner had told her about during her brief moment of freedom. It was risky. Every digital footprint was a potential discovery. But she needed someone outside Victor's control to have this information in case something went wrong. "This is enough," Professor Morris replied. "When you're ready to leave, contact me. I'll have everything arranged. When you're ready." As if readiness was something Amara could simply choose. But she was running out of time. Victor's divorce proceedings with Elena had begun, and he was getting more erratic, more possessive. He'd started talking about the wedding constantly, showing her venue options, designer dress sketches, guest lists. "It's going to be perfect," he'd say, his eyes feverish with an excitement that scared her. "Everyone will see how much I love you, how much you belong to me." Belong to him. He didn't even hear himself anymore, didn't realize how his language revealed his true feelings. She wasn't a partner. She was a prized possession he was finally ready to display publicly. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Victor arrived at the villa earlier than usual, his expression stormy. He poured himself a drink without greeting her, downing it in one swallow. "Is everything all right?" Amara asked carefully. "Elena's lawyers are causing problems," he said. "She's threatening to expose certain aspects of our arrangement. Claims I've been keeping another woman. Can you imagine? As if I'd risk everything for her." He stopped, seeming to remember who he was talking to. His expression shifted, became conciliating. "She's lying, of course. Desperate lies from a desperate woman. But it means we need to accelerate our timeline." Amara's stomach dropped. "Accelerate? The wedding? We can't wait 6 months." We're doing it in 6 weeks. He turned to face her, and there was something manic in his eyes. I need to make this official before Elena's accusations gain any traction. Once you're publicly my wife, her claims will look like jealous fantasy. 6 weeks. The walls were closing in faster than she'd anticipated. That's very soon, she managed. Too soon. His voice took on an edge. I thought you'd be happy, unless you're having doubts. No, she said quickly. No doubts. Just surprised. He crossed to her, pulling her close with an intensity that bordered on violence. Good. Because you're mine, Amara. You've always been mine, and soon everyone will know it. That night, after Victor left, Amara made her decision. She couldn't wait any longer. She had 6 weeks before she'd be locked into this nightmare publicly and permanently. 6 weeks before Victor's delusion became legal reality. She had to escape now. She emailed Professor Morris with a simple message. I'm ready. 2 weeks from tonight. Can you help? The response came within an hour. Everything will be in place. Trust the plan. You deserve to be free. Free. Such a simple word. Such an impossible concept after 5 years of captivity disguised as love. Amara spent the next 2 weeks in careful preparation. She practiced her designs with her left hand until she could sketch quickly and confidently. She moved small amounts of cash from her secret account to various hiding places around the villa. She studied flight schedules and visa requirements. She created a new portfolio under her birth name, Amara Okoye, showcasing designs she'd created in stolen moments over the past months. And she played her role flawlessly. The excited bride-to-be, the grateful recipient of Victor's protection, the woman who believed his promises. Victor seemed to relax as the wedding plans progressed. He saw her compliance as confirmation that his control was complete. He even allowed her more freedom around the estate, no longer questioning when she walked the gardens at night. That freedom would be his mistake. 3 days before her planned escape, disaster struck. Elena appeared at Amara's villa. She arrived without warning, bypassing security with the authority of someone who technically owned half of everything Victor possessed. Amara was in her studio when she heard the commotion downstairs. Raised voices, the housekeeper protesting, and then Elena's sharp tones cutting through it all. Where is she? Where's the whore my husband's been keeping? Amara's blood went cold. She stood frozen as footsteps climbed the stairs, as Elena burst into the studio with 2 security guards trailing helplessly behind her. Elena Kane was beautiful even in fury. Her pregnancy was clearly visible now, her hand resting protectively over the swell of her belly. But her eyes were wild, desperate. You, Elena spat. You're the reason my marriage is falling apart. I didn't know, Amara said, finding her voice. I didn't know about you until recently. He told me we were married. Liar. Elena's voice cracked. You knew. You had to know. Do you have any idea what you've done? He's divorcing me, taking everything. And for what? For you? You're nothing. You're not even real to him. You're just an obsession, a fantasy he can control. Then let me go, Amara said quietly. Telling you want me gone. You win. I don't want to be here. Something in her tone must have gotten through because Elena's expression shifted from rage to confusion. You're serious. You actually want to leave him. More than anything. Elena stared at her for a long moment, and Amara saw understanding dawn. They weren't rivals. They were both Victor's victims, just in different cages. He'll never let you go, Elena said finally. I've tried to leave. He has files on me, leverage, threats. He owns judges, police, politicians. The man I married doesn't exist. He's a mask over something dark and possessive and unstoppable. Maybe, Amara said, but I have to try. Elena's guards shifted uncomfortably, and Amara realized they were Victor's men, not Elena's. They were listening to everything, which meant Victor would know about this conversation within the hour. Elena seemed to realize it too. Her expression hardened, the vulnerability disappearing behind a mask of cold fury. You think you can escape him? You're delusional. You're nothing but a kept woman in a gilded cage, and that's all you'll ever be. She turned and left, her guards following. But as she reached the doorway, she glanced back, and for just a second, Amara saw something else in her eyes. A warning, maybe even a wish for success. Amara had maybe an hour before Victor arrived. She didn't waste it. She grabbed her laptop and deleted everything she could, emails, browsing history, any trace of her planning. She took the cash from her hiding places and secured it in a small bag she could carry easily. She dressed in layers, practical clothes that wouldn't draw attention. And she sent one final message to Professor Morris. Timeline moved up. Tonight. Emergency. Victor arrived as sunset was painting the sky orange and red. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He walked in her villa like he owned it, because legally he did. Elena was here, he said. His voice was eerily calm, which scared Amara more than if he'd been shouting. Yes, Amara said. She was upset. What did you tell her? Nothing. She didn't give me a chance to say much. She called me names and left. Victor studied her face, and Amara forced herself to meet his eyes without flinching. After a moment, he seemed to accept her story. She's becoming a problem, he said. Making accusations, showing up uninvited. I'm going to have to take steps. Steps. The word hung in the air between them, ominous and undefined. What kind of steps? Amara asked. Nothing you need to worry about. He moved closer, backing her against the wall. You just need to focus on the wedding. 6 weeks, Amara. 6 weeks, and you'll be mine in every way that matters. Legally, publicly, permanently. His hand came up to stroke her cheek, and it took everything Amara had not to flinch away. I've been thinking, he continued. After the wedding, we should go away for a while. I'm buying a private island. No neighbors, no interference. Just us. We can build something perfect there away from all these complications. An island, another cage, but this one even more inescapable. Amara saw her future stretching out in an endless series of beautiful prisons, each more isolated than the last. That sounds wonderful, she lied. He smiled and kissed her forehead. I need to go back to the office. Crisis management with Elena's accusations. But I'll be back tomorrow. Try to rest. You seem stressed lately. After he left, Amara sat in the growing darkness, her heart pounding. An island. He was planning to take her somewhere she could never escape from, which meant she had to act tonight. There was no more time for careful planning. Her phone buzzed with a message from Professor Morris. Car will be at the South Gate at 3 a.m. Driver named Marcus. He'll say Catherine sent me. One chance. Be there. Amara waited until midnight, then began her final preparations. She couldn't take much. Anything obvious would trigger alerts. A small bag with cash, identification, copies of the evidence she'd gathered. She dressed in dark, practical clothes. And she took one thing from her studio, the sketches for the Gilded Cage collection. Her future, if she could get to it. The bracelet was the biggest problem. She couldn't remove it without triggering an alert, and Victor would immediately know she was fleeing. But the electronic shop owner had given her one piece of advice during their brief interaction. If you need 30 minutes of confusion, destroy it completely. Crush it. The sudden loss of signal will trigger alerts, but they'll waste time trying to determine if it's a malfunction or a real emergency. At 2:30 a.m., Amara took the bracelet to her studio and placed it on her work table. She picked up a hammer she used for jewelry work and brought it down hard. The bracelet cracked, sparked, and went dark. Alarms would be going off at Victor's security center. She had maybe 20 minutes before they mobilized. maybe less. She ran. The south gate was a service entrance, rarely used, hidden behind overgrown landscaping. She'd mapped the security camera blind spots during her weeks of planning, moving from shadow to shadow. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might explode. A car was waiting, engine running, lights off. As she approached, the driver's window rolled down. "Catherine sent me," a man's voice said quietly. Amara didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the back seat, and the car pulled away smoothly, not too fast to draw attention, but fast enough to matter. "Where are we going?" she gasped. "Airport. Private terminal. You have a passport?" "Yes. My original one. Amara Okoye." "Good. There's a flight to Paris in 2 hours. We'll just make it if we don't hit traffic." Amara looked back through the rear window. The estate was disappearing behind them, and she still couldn't quite believe it was happening. She was actually leaving. After 5 years, she was actually... Her phone rang. "Victor." "Don't answer it," Marcus said. "In fact, destroy it. Now, take out the SIM card and snap it. Throw the pieces out different windows." Amara did as instructed, her hand shaking. The phone kept ringing as she dismantled it, Victor's name flashing accusingly on the screen. Then it was in pieces scattered along the highway behind them. They drove in silence for 20 minutes. Amara kept expecting sirens, expecting Victor's security to materialize, expecting to be dragged back. But the road remained clear. "We're being followed," Marcus said suddenly. Amara's stomach dropped. She turned to look, but Marcus shook his head. "Don't." "Black Mercedes, 3 cars back. Been with us since we left the estate." "What do we do?" "We lose them." He smiled grimly. "Catherine warned me Victor Kane has resources. I came prepared." He took an exit ramp at the last possible second, tires squealing. The Mercedes tried to follow, but got blocked by a truck. Marcus wove through side streets, doubled back, took turns that seemed random, but clearly weren't. He'd memorized escape routes. After 15 minutes of evasive driving, he finally relaxed. "We're clear, but we need to move fast. He'll have people at the airport." "Ow!" Professor Morris arranged special clearance. "You'll go through a private security checkpoint, bypass the main terminal. Victor's people will be watching the regular gates." They arrived at the airport at 4:47 a.m. Dawn was just starting to lighten the eastern sky. Marcus led her to an unmarked door, knocked in a pattern, and a woman in an airport security uniform appeared. "Amara Okoye?" she asked. "Yes." "Come with me. Quickly." Amara followed her through a maze of corridors, past checkpoints where guards waved them through without question. Professor Morris had clearly called in significant favors. They emerged in a private boarding area where a handful of passengers waited. "Flight 447 to Paris Charles de Gaulle," the woman said. "Boarding in 10 minutes. Stay out of sight until they call your boarding group. And Miss Okoye, good luck." Amara found a seat in a corner, trying to make herself invisible. Every second felt like an hour. Every person who walked by felt like a threat. She kept expecting Victor to appear, to drag her back, to end this impossible dream of freedom. The boarding call came. She stood on shaking legs and joined the line. Showed her passport. Walked down the jetway. Found her seat. Buckled in. Still, she couldn't believe it. Even as the plane pushed back from the gate, even as it taxied to the runway, she expected something to go wrong. The engines roared. The plane accelerated. And then they were lifting, climbing, leaving Singapore and Victor Kane and 5 years of captivity behind. Amara pressed her face to the window and watched the city shrink below her. Somewhere down there, Victor was probably just discovering she was gone. Somewhere down there, her cage sat empty for the first time in 5 years. She closed her eyes and let herself cry for the years lost, for the woman she'd been, for the dreams she'd given up. but also for the future that was suddenly, impossibly possible again. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was rising over the ocean. A new day, a new beginning. The flight attendant came by with breakfast, and Amara realized she was starving. She hadn't eaten since lunch the day before, too nervous to keep anything down. Now, safely in the air, safely beyond Victor's reach, she ate everything on the tray. "First time to Paris?" the attendant asked kindly. "Yes," Amara said, then corrected herself. "Actually, no. I was supposed to go 5 years ago. This is my second chance." The attendant smiled. Paris loves second chances. Amara pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw with her left hand. The designs flowed easier now, unburdened by fear. She drew cages that transformed into birds, chains that became jewelry, prisons that dissolved into freedom. The Gilded Cage collection. It would tell her story. It would be her testimony and her triumph. By the time the plane landed in Paris, she had 15 new designs sketched. Professor Morris was waiting at arrivals, and when she saw Amara, her eyes filled with tears. "Welcome home," she said, embracing her former student. "Welcome to your real life." The first few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and protection orders. Professor Morris had connected Amara with lawyers who specialized in international domestic abuse cases. They filed everything: restraining orders, documentation of the illegal imprisonment, evidence of surveillance and control. Victor tried to fight it. His lawyers argued that Amara had left voluntarily, that there was no proof of coercion. But the evidence she'd gathered was overwhelming. The surveillance logs, the tracking bracelet, the staged attack, the financial records showing payments for her silence. The Singapore authorities opened an investigation. Elena came forward with her own testimony about Victor's controlling behavior. Elena's testimony was devastating. She described years of manipulation, financial control, and psychological abuse. She revealed that Victor had used their company's resources to monitor her communications, control her movements, and isolate her from her family. The prosecutors discovered that several of Victor's security team had criminal records, that the staged attack on Amara wasn't an isolated incident, and that Victor had been systematically violating privacy laws for years. Kane Industries' stock plummeted as the scandal broke. Board members distanced themselves. Business partners severed contracts. The empire Victor had built on control and manipulation began crumbling as quickly as it had risen. Amara watched it all unfold from Paris, safe in the small apartment Professor Morris had helped her secure. She attended therapy twice a week, working through the trauma of 5 years spent believing a lie. Some days were harder than others. She'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a panic, convinced Victor was in the apartment. She'd see men who looked like him on the street and have to stop, breathe, remind herself she was free. But slowly, day by day, she healed. And she designed. The Gilded Cage collection grew from 15 sketches to 40 pieces. She worked with her left hand exclusively now, developing a distinctive style that was uniquely hers. The designs merged traditional Kenyan textiles and patterns from her heritage with stark, modern minimalism. Each piece told part of her story: constraint and liberation, darkness and light, captivity and freedom. Professor Morris introduced her to manufacturers, fabric suppliers, and other designers. Amara registered her business under her birth name, establishing her brand as Zara, a name that meant blooming flower, in Arabic, representing her rebirth. 6 months after her escape, she received an email from Elena. The subject line simply read, "Thank you." The message was brief. "The investigation freed me too. I left Singapore with my daughter. Victor is facing criminal charges. He's lost everything, but more importantly, he's lost his power over us. I hope you're building something beautiful with your freedom. You deserve it. Amara read the email 3 times, then archived it carefully. She and Elena weren't friends. They probably never would be. But they were both survivors, and that connection mattered. She replied with just 2 words, "We survived." The breakthrough came 8 months after her escape. Paris Fashion Week was approaching, and a prominent curator reached out after seeing Amara's portfolio online. There was a slot available in the Emerging Designers Showcase, a last-minute cancellation. Would Zara be interested in presenting? Amara's hands shook as she read the email. This was it. This was the moment she'd been working toward. The dream she'd given up 5 years ago was being offered again, but better, earned through her own resilience rather than granted as a scholarship. She accepted immediately. The next 6 weeks were a controlled chaos of fittings, alterations, model castings, and sleepless nights. Amara worked until her left hand cramped, then worked some more. Professor Morris helped coordinate logistics, arrange financing, connected Amara with the right people. The collection came together like pieces of a puzzle. 40 looks, each one a statement. The opening piece was a stark white dress with gold cage details that appeared solid from one angle, but dissolved into flowing fabric from another. The closing piece was a black gown covered in platinum chains that, on closer inspection, were actually broken links, fragments that created beauty without constraint. And at the center of the collection, displayed in a glass case rather than worn, was the bracelet. Victor's bracelet. Amara had retrieved it from the evidence locker once the criminal case concluded. She'd had it mounted in a shadow box with a simple placard. The gilded cage, evidence of control, symbol of survival. 2025. The night before the show, Amara couldn't sleep. She walked the Paris streets at 2 a.m., marveling at her freedom. She could walk anywhere, go anywhere, be anyone. The city was alive even in the small hours, and she was part of it, not watching from behind glass, but living, breathing, belonging. She thought about Victor. The last news report she'd seen said he was awaiting trial, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed. His empire had become his prison, just as her villa had been hers. She didn't feel satisfaction exactly, more like a sense of cosmic justice. He'd tried to cage her love, and in the end, he'd cage himself. The morning of the show dawned clear and bright. Backstage was controlled chaos. Models, makeup artists, dressers, photographers, all moving in orchestrated confusion. Amara stood in the center of it all, sketchbook in her left hand, making last-minute adjustments. 5 minutes, the stage manager called. Professor Morris appeared at Amara's elbow. "How are you feeling?" Terrified, Amara admitted. "What if they hate it? What if no one understands what I'm trying to say?" "Then they're not your audience," Professor Morris said firmly. "But Amara, they're going to love it. Because it's real. It's you. And that's what fashion needs. Truth, not just beauty." The lights dimmed. Music began. A haunting melody Amara had commissioned from a Kenyan composer, traditional instruments blending with electronic beats. The first model appeared on the runway. Amara watched from the wings as her collection came to life. Each piece told its part of the story. The audience was silent at first, leaning forward, studying the details. Then the reactions began, gasps, murmurs, the flash of phones and cameras capturing every moment. When the bracelet appeared in its display case, carried down the runway by a model, the audience erupted. They understood. They saw what it represented. Not just Amara's story, but the stories of countless women trapped by men who confused love with ownership. The final gown appeared, the broken chains creating a cascade of metallic beauty. The model paused at the end of the runway, turned, and the chains caught the light, transforming from symbols of bondage into pure art. The music swelled, the lights came up, and the audience rose to their feet. Amara walked onto the runway, her heart in her throat. The applause was deafening. Critics who'd seen thousands of shows were wiping tears from their eyes. Buyers were already on their phones, placing orders. Cameras flashed like lightning. But more than that, more than the professional success, more than the validation, Amara felt something shift inside her. The last chains broke. The last walls fell. She was no longer Amara who was trapped or Amara who escaped. She was simply Amara, whole, free, herself. In the audience, she spotted people whose presence surprised her. Former classmates from design school. Her mother, who'd flown from Kenya despite their years of estrangement. Even Elena, sitting in the back row, holding her daughter, tears streaming down her face. They had all survived. They were all still here. And that mattered more than anything Victor had tried to take from them. After the show, Amara stood in her Paris studio, a real studio now, with floor-to-ceiling windows and northern light and space to create. The bracelet sat on her desk in its shadow box, a reminder that would never be forgotten but no longer had power. She picked up her pencil with her left hand and began to sketch. Not cages this time, not chains, just beauty for its own sake. Fashion that celebrated freedom, that adorned without constraining, that enhanced rather than controlled. Her phone buzzed with messages, interview requests, collaboration offers, congratulations from people around the world. She'd answer them later. Right now, she just wanted to sit in her studio, in her city, in her life, and create. The sun set over Paris, painting the sky in oranges and reds and purples. Amara watched it through her open windows she could walk through any time she wanted, doors she could lock or unlock as she chose. A life that was entirely, completely, finally hers. She thought about sending Victor a message. Something final, something that would let him know she'd won. But in the end, she realized her freedom was message enough. Her success was the ultimate revenge. Her happiness was the best testimony. Victor Kane had tried to own her. Instead, she'd owned her story, and that made all the difference. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with Amara's journey. Her story is a reminder that cages, even gilded ones, are still prisons, and that love should never feel like captivity. Freedom is worth fighting for. Dreams are worth reclaiming, and it's never too late to escape into the life you deserve. Please like this video if Amara's story resonated with you. Subscribe for more powerful narratives, and comment below telling us where you're watching from and what freedom means to you. Your stories matter. Your voice matters. And remember, you deserve a love that opens doors, not one that locks them. Until next time, stay free.